Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something that's honestly a pretty huge debate in the education world. It's our focus for Lesson 2, General versus Specific Academic English. If you've ever taken a university class, or if you teach one, you already know that mastering academic language is a massive undertaking. But here's the real question. How exactly should we be teaching it? Should we give everyone a universal set of core skills? Or should we treat every single university department like it's its own unique culture, complete with its own specific language? Let's get right into it.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to kick things off with the big question: one English or many? Then we'll look at English for general purposes and the case for EGAP, followed by English for specific purposes and the case for ESAP. And finally, we'll see how modern educators are finding a practical middle ground.
Section 1. One English or many?
It's so common to step onto a university campus and just kind of assume that all academic writing is exactly the same, right? We have this tendency to think of academic English as this single, monolithic, universal language. But is it really? Like, is a biology student writing a lab report actually using the exact same set of language skills as a literature student writing a thesis on Shakespeare?
Well, this tension is perfectly captured by prominent researcher Anne Johns. After doing some pretty extensive needs assessments, she observed that, quote, though some generalizations can be made about the conventions and skills in academia, the differences among them may be greater than the similarities. She points out that the specific discipline, the audience, and the context, they all massively influence the language you need to use. So in reality, students are forced to constantly readjust their writing style for every new academic discipline they step into.
And this brilliantly sets up the two heavyweights in our debate. On one side, we've got EGAP, which stands for English for General Academic Purposes. Basically, this approach tries to isolate the skills and language forms that are common across all disciplines. On the flip side, we have ESAP, or English for Specific Academic Purposes. This philosophy argues that, hey, the differences between disciplines are just so vast, we literally have to teach the specific language skills required by a particular department.
Section 2. English for General Purposes.
So if you look at how textbooks handle this, like in Unit A1 here, you see this concept of specificity introduced right away. Following that EGAP approach, teachers actively try to distill the whole university experience down to a set of universal practices. They're basically hunting for the absolute bedrock, the language forms and study activities that every single student is going to need, completely regardless of what their major is.
Researchers Dudley Evans and St. John actually pinpoint these specific activities as the generic foundation. They call it the common core for all students. And it makes sense, right? No matter what you study, you're going to be listening to lectures, you'll be participating in seminars and tutorials, you'll be reading textbooks, and you'll definitely be writing essays, exams, and reports. So an EGAP approach encourages us to view things like note-taking, questioning, and summarizing as generic academic practices. The idea is, you teach them once, and students can transfer those skills absolutely anywhere.
Section 3. The case for EGAP.
So, why do so many educators passionately advocate for this general approach? Well, one of the absolute strongest arguments comes from Ruth Spack. Try to think about this from the teacher's perspective for a second. Language teachers are experts in language, right? Not necessarily in thermodynamics or corporate law. Spack argues that English teachers actually lack control over specialist content. Her point is that if an English teacher tries to teach the highly specific writing conventions of, say, a civil engineering department, they might actually end up misleading the students. Spack says those super specific conventions should just be left to the people who know them best, the actual subject professors.
And there are a bunch of other really compelling reasons to favor EGAP. For starters, subject-specific tasks can just be way too hard for beginners. They really need a solid foundation in general English first. On top of that, a general approach prepares students for the unpredictable. University life is diverse. A student might be taking electives in history, math, and art all at the same time. So educating them broadly just works better than training them for one highly narrow task. Plus, researcher Anne Rimes makes this fascinating point. Focusing only on what specific departments want kind of relegates language teachers to what she calls a low-status butler's stance. Basically, just serving the needs of other faculties instead of developing their own independent curriculum. And finally, proponents argue that the general principles of good inquiry and rhetoric, they apply absolutely everywhere, across all good writing.
Section 4. English for Specific Purposes.
All right, we're going to pivot now to the ESAP philosophy, which fundamentally challenges pretty much everything we just talked about.
To really get ESAP, you have to understand this concept of academic tribes. This is a term popularized by Beecher back in 1989. This perspective views a university not as one big, happy, single community, but actually as a collection of distinct tribes. Every single discipline, whether that's biology, sociology, literature, it's a separate culture. They have their own instrumental procedures, their own rules for what makes a valid argument, and most importantly, their own totally unique modes of discourse. So joining a university basically means learning the distinct language of your specific academic tribe.
What's really interesting here is how concretely this categorization by Coffin and colleagues anchors that whole tribal metaphor. It shows just how vastly different the written genres actually are across these disciplines. I mean, think about it. If you're in the sciences, your tribe communicates through lab reports, project proposals, and fieldwork notes. But if you're in the humanities, your tribe communicates through essays and theses. So trying to teach a universal essay format to a physics student who literally only needs to write lab reports is, according to the ESAP view anyway, a total waste of their time.
Section 5. The case for ESAP. This brings us to the really strong rebuttals from researchers who believe that a general EGAP approach isn't just inefficient, but is actually fundamentally flawed. Ken Hyland delivers a real cornerstone argument for this side. He states flatly, students do not learn in a cultural vacuum. What he means is, you just cannot separate language from the context in which it's being used. Disciplinary activities are a huge part of how students engage with others in their field. Effective communication only happens when students use the specific conventions of their particular academic culture appropriately.
Let's unpack the main arguments for ESAP a bit more. You remember SPAC's argument that subject professors should teach their own writing conventions? Well, ESAP proponents fire back by pointing out that subject specialists rarely have the time, the expertise, or honestly even the desire to actually teach writing. Second, they have serious doubts about this whole common core idea because meaning literally changes based on context. A grammatical form can mean one thing in a history paper and something completely different in a chemistry report. Third, ESAP completely rejects the idea that academic literacy is just a set of discrete, value-free rules. And finally, ESAP avoids treating language learning as some quick band-aid fix for struggling students. Instead, it recognizes the really deep, complex, specialized literacies required to truly master a profession. So, we have two very strong, very opposing philosophies. How do modern educators actually build a curriculum out of this?
Section 6. Finding the middle ground.
Now we can explore how these ideas are actually synthesized in the real world, because real-world curriculums often have to navigate right down the middle of this divide. The source material highlights the Oxford EAP course as a really prime example of a program that successfully navigates this tension between teaching general skills and respecting specific contexts. It acknowledges that yes, every student has slightly different needs depending on their chosen discipline, but it still manages to find a way to build a unified, cohesive classroom experience.
Here's exactly how they bridge that gap. First, they focus on core academic tasks that are relevant to all students, like, say, working out the main points of a text. This is a clear nod to the EGAP philosophy. But step 2 is where the magic really happens. They require students to approach the course content from different disciplinary perspectives: economic, technological, legal, social. They actually ask students to discuss these issues in relation to their own specific disciplines. And finally, in step 3, they focus on helping students transfer those language skills to brand new contexts. It's this brilliant general course that forces specific, contextualized application.
So, the really crucial point is how this applies to the nitty-gritty of teaching grammar and language. Rather than treating grammar as some universal, abstract set of rules, this middle ground approach focuses on highly frequent patterns, like complex noun phrases, for example. But instead of just having students memorize rules, they examine these patterns strictly in context. They look at how they're used for specific tasks, like writing definitions or taking notes. It directly relates the structure of the language to its actual meaning and use within a text. And by doing that, it actively avoids the trap of trying to explain every single grammatical possibility in a vacuum.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to reflect on for your own learning or teaching journey. Based on everything we've unpacked today from these sources, when you step into a university, are you preparing to navigate a single universal academic world? Or are you, in fact, learning the initiation rites and the complex language of a very specific academic tribe? Honestly, the answer might just change how you approach your very next reading or writing assignment. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep exploring.